Good evening. Well, I show 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to our community meeting discussing Assembly Bill 481 on the use of military equipment, funding of military equipment, as well as the acquisition of that equipment. I want to thank the members of our community who chose to attend tonight's meeting. Tonight we're going to be discussing this specific topic, but I wanted to just introduce who will be in the meeting there. Make sure my slides are advancing. I want to make sure everybody knows who's in the meeting. My name is David Spiller. I'm the police chief, and I'll be facilitating the meeting tonight. I'm joined by Lieutenant Scott Eberly, who is a member of our organization, and our city attorney, Lisa Goldfein, is on the call as well. I'd like to thank our city clerk, Lindsay Lara, who is also managing the meeting and will be assisting with public comment and chat comments that are made. I would like to let attendees that are in the Zoom room tonight know that we are recording this presentation. What we're going to address tonight is, again, centered on Assembly Bill 481. We're going to talk about the background and how the bill was originally crafted in the legislature. We're going to talk a little bit about military equipment and how it's defined as outlined in Assembly Bill 481. We're going to address the specific equipment that is needed in our municipal law enforcement application. And we'll discuss also how the equipment that we have is funded, acquired, and used here in the city of San Rafael. We will specifically disclose and share San Rafael PD's equipment inventory, what specific items as defined in the legislation that we have and that we use. And we'll also overview the engagement activities in our community outreach as it relates to this legislation. And then lastly, we will create the opportunity for any questions, concerns, or comments by the public. I'd like to offer that if anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to submit in the chat, please feel free to do that during the meeting, and our city clerk will be able to gather those comments and facilitate that at the end of the meeting. There will also be a period where the public can provide comment verbally if any attendees choose to do so. Okay, so Assembly Bill 481 was authored by Assembly Member David Chu. This was to address the funding, the acquisition, and the use of military equipment. As this bill passed through the legislature, ultimately being signed by the governor in 2021, became codified in the government code under sections 7070, 7071, and 7072 of the government code. The spirit of the legislation was to increase transparency and provide oversight for the use of military equipment specifically as defined in the legislation. The Assembly bill also provides safeguards to protect the public's welfare, to protect public safety, and to protect the civil rights and liberties of individuals. Moving forward, the legislation allows and requires an annual report for law enforcement organizations using military equipment as defined. It requires and allows the equipment usage and updates annually for the police department to document any internal audits, as well as an opportunity to summarize community feedback to the governing body, which is our city council. Lastly, this legislation creates a public forum for input and engagement, including community meetings such as the meeting we're facilitating tonight. Essentially effective as of January 1, local law enforcement as well as counties across the state of California are required to develop and adopt policy to present to their local governing board for consideration an ordinance reflective of that policy, as well as the equipment as defined in the legislation, to specifically highlight and overview the inventory of military equipment the organization is considering using or has been using. And with all of these items publicly available, to create a public forum and to encourage community interaction on the subject. Ultimately, if adopted by the governing board, the annual reporting requirement is it will be an annual requirement. I think I jumped ahead one. Okay, Assembly Bill 481 requires our city council approval for any equipment that we've used prior to January of 2022. So this is new legislation. As far as the San Rafael Police Department, the only thing new here is the legislation. We're not proposing any disclosure of intent to procure, purchase, or acquire any new equipment. What we are intending to do is simply disclose and highlight the military equipment as defined by the legislation that we have in our inventory and that we have for our law enforcement use. Publicly sharing what equipment we have is, again, one of our affirmative responsibilities pursuant to the new legislation. And then again, moving forward, AB481 also requires our annual report, which will include how our equipment is being used, any maintenance issues or costs, our internal audits, and again, the community feedback that we receive. The San Rafael Police Department's first annual report will be presented publicly to the City Council in May of 2023. As we transition to discuss the definition of military equipment, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Everly, who will highlight the specific categories of military equipment as defined in the legislation. Scott?
Got it. Thank you, Chief. I am going to go into equipment defined and then specifically talk about what equipment we have and some of its uses. So military equipment as defined in AB481 is classified into 15 specific categories. It does not include general equipment not designated or controlled by the Federal Defense Logistics Agency, or the DLA. The DLA supports agencies by providing materials from copy paper to uniforms, you name it, they basically have it, to any small businesses or major corporations that want to obtain equipment, goods, and services from the DLA. That's not what we're going to be talking about tonight. Tonight, we're specifically talking about the military, quote, military equipment defined by AB 481. Go to the next slide, please. So as you can see, AB 481 defines the military equipment into 15 separate and different categories. I like to show this slide along with the next slide, if you could, there we go. And the highlighted sections there are the ones owned and used by San Rafael Police Department. We currently possess 7 of the 15 categories, and I will quickly go down the list, but I will explain them in more detail in a future slide. So the first one is unmanned, remotely piloted, powered aerial ground vehicles, basically a robot. We do have one of those. Category 2, mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles or armored personnel carriers. We do own an armored personnel carrier. Perfect. And there's a picture of our armored rescue vehicle is what we call it, otherwise known as an ARV. I think it resembles an Amazon delivery van, but it's actually a Ford F-350 van that is completely armored and can hold equipment and personnel. And I will go into more detail on that in a later slide. We can go, there we go. Category 5 is command and control vehicles. We do own a command trailer. Category 7, battering rams that are, or breaching apparatuses that are explosive in nature. We do have breaching rounds. I'll go into that in more detail. Specialized firearms and ammunition of less than 50 caliber. So that would be our patrol rifles that are in each of our vehicles and our sniper rifles. Category 12, the noise, flash, diversionary devices, explosive breaching tools, munitions, tear gas, or OC. And that excludes our standard OC canister that is on the belt of every officer that works here. Category 13, I just want to touch real quick. We do not own the taser shockwave system. It's not our tasers that we carry on our persons. It is a completely different system that is designed to affect a greater area and at a greater distance. We do not own that. We do own items in category 14. It's our kinetic energy weapons and munitions, otherwise known as our less than lethal munitions. You can go to the next slide. Now I want to dive a little deeper into the specific equipment that we have and some of the uses. So this slide shows the equipment that we possess, and I want to talk about it in more detail. As I talk about the equipment, I'm going to mention the advantages they create, specifically time, distance, and cover, which all lead to the de-escalation and peaceful resolution of the incident. In the first category, I talked about we owned a tactical robot. It's the remote controlled robot. This is a commercially purchased robot that anyone can purchase. We use it in situations to help minimize the risk of sending actual personnel into potentially violent situations. The robot creates time, distance, and cover for our officers to gather intelligence and to communicate with the subject inside. The robot is equipped with a camera and a speaker that allows for communication. One example where we used the robot was the almost 24-hour standoff of the armed suspect at the extended stay hotel. After the suspect fired shots and officers were outside the suspect's hotel room, we were able to pull back our officers and keep them from harm's way. We replaced them with our robot, who had a camera fixed on the suspect's door so that we would know if he were to leave or open his door without exposing any of our officers to harm. This created enough distance and cover for our negotiations team to try and resolve the situation. Category 2, our armed rescue vehicle, or ARV. I showed the picture of the ARV a couple slides ago, and this piece of equipment has become instrumental to us. The ARV not only creates cover for our officers or negotiators to get close to a violent situation without the increased danger, it also creates time. It creates an environment that officers can limit containment of a subject while being completely protected. It also can be used as a vehicle to quickly rescue a person who is in harm's way. One example of when we deployed our ARV was about a year ago in a well-populated neighborhood. One homeowner was having a bad day and was upset with his neighbor's landscaper, specifically the use of the leaf blower. Well, this homeowner came out to his front porch and brandished a shotgun, threatening to use it if the landscapers did not stop. We were called out and immediately deployed the ARV with a licensed clinician as one of the passengers, and who is also a member of our crisis negotiations team. From the ARV, we were successfully able to contain the homeowner without exposing any of our officers to harm's way, and successfully negotiated the suspect out of his house. This was a great example of the use of our ARV in creating cover for our officers so that we could negotiate a peaceful resolution. Category 5 is a command trailer. It is a 30-foot towable trailer that is used to establish a command center and major operations. We not only use this trailer at major incidents, but we also use it for operations such as DUI checkpoints. It can hold equipment and personnel and also houses our dispatch if they need to go mobile. Category 7 are breaching rounds. I want to be clear that the San Rafael Police Department does not own, use, or operate any explosive breaching equipment such as detonation cord or water type explosives. The breaching equipment we do possess are shotgun rounds that are fired from a regular shotgun that are designed and used to defeat locking mechanisms on doors. We use these rounds to safely gain entry into a structure. We would only use such equipment when it is the safest option available to us. These breaching rounds are only available to our SWAT team members, and each SWAT team member has passed yearly training and recertification courses for use of such equipment. It should be noted that even though we started our breaching round program in 2005, we have not had to use such rounds in any actual event. Category 10 are patrol and precision or sniper rifles. The rifles allow officers to assess a threat from a greater distance than a handgun. The patrol rifles were purchased back in 2001 after an armed subject with a rifle came down from Katati and shot at 2 of our San Rafael police officers, nearly missing one of them by inches. The attack was unprovoked and came without any notice. In fact, one of our officers was just sitting at a local parking lot typing reports. Also around that same time was the North Hollywood shootout that I'm sure you're familiar with, where officers who were outgunned had to commandeer weapons from a nearby gun store. Because of the increasing violent crimes being committed with assault rifles all over the nation, the San Rafael Police Department purchased the rifles. I do want to point out that even though we've had our rifle program for over 20 years, no one has ever had to fire them at anyone. This is equipment that is better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Category 12 of diversionary devices or tear gas. and tear gas. The diversionary devices emit a loud noise and brilliant white light, distracting anyone who is close by when it goes off. These are tools that are used by officers to gain a tactical advantage in cases such as hostage or barricaded suspect situations. In other words, these pieces of equipment are used to mitigate the capabilities of suspect actions. They are strictly used by our SWAT personnel who train and certify with them on a yearly basis. One example I want to share with you is when we were called out to a house of an estranged parent who was holding her child hostage. She threatened harm to the child and herself during the incident. And after hours and hours of negotiating, the suspect became more and more agitated, and it was obvious she was about to harm the child. We had officers throw diversionary devices into our backyard as an entry team, successfully made entry into the front and rescued the child without harm to anyone involved, including the suspect. The diversionary devices create time for officers to implement their plan and thus creating a better opportunity for a safe resolution. The San Rafael Police Department also has in its inventory a small supply of chemical agents or tear gas. These agents are to be used to limit the escalation of force. For example, tear gas could be deployed on a prolonged violent situation where an armed individual is refusing to give up or surrender. Chemical agents or tear gas has been in the police department's inventory for over 3 decades and has never been used in a real life scenario. This is also equipment that is better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. In our last category, it's category 14. It's our 40 millimeter less than lethal equipment. We deploy a sponge round out of the system that is intended to stop the threat from a greater distance than other less lethal systems. For example, our taser system that each officer possesses has a range of 15 to 25 feet. The 40 millimeter sponge round has a maximum effective range of 75 feet. This piece of equipment gives the officer more time to make decisions from a greater distance. One such example we had was about a year ago. A female was threatening hotel guests at a local hotel, and she was armed with 2 knives. By the time we got there, she was outside holding a knife in each of her hand. She was emotionally distraught, and we deployed the ARV as well as our less lethal system. As our mental health expert and licensed clinician was talking with the subject, she, without notice, started yelling and charging at one of our officers holding both of the knives. That officer, fearing for his safety, deployed the less than lethal round, striking her in the abdomen and causing her to drop the knives. At that time, the officers were able to approach the woman and successfully take her into custody without further incident. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. That was our equipment that we have and its uses. I want to talk about why the police department needs this equipment. So why do we need this equipment designated by AB481? These items that I've just discussed are in the police department's inventory and authorized by the department policy for the safe and peaceful resolution to situations involving lack of suspect compliance or active suspect resistance, and to allow for time and distance and de-escalation. The first goal is very simple. We expect these pieces of equipment to positively influence outcomes by making it safer for the involved parties, the surrounding community, and the police. We use these tools to decrease the risk of civilian deaths and to increase the ability to protect civil rights and civil liberties that are subject to arrest but non-compliant. I want to take a moment to dive a little bit deeper into the meaning of de-escalation from the lens of a police officer. When we talk about de-escalating a violent situation, the police have to act quickly, assess and determine how to best handle the situation. But not every violent situation is the same. The officer needs to assess the person's actions, what the person is doing, capabilities, is the person armed and how far away are they from potential victims, officers, and the public, and the intentions, which is oftentimes the most difficult to assess. Once the officer has assessed the actions, capabilities, and intentions, the officer must then quickly use his or her resources to resolve the situation. Some of these resources are the pieces of equipment that I previously talked about tonight. These pieces of equipment help us contain actions, mitigate capabilities, and they help us influence intentions. You may ask how this equipment helps us achieve those goals. Well, in each situation, the officers factor three things upon first contact: time, distance, and cover. Having more time to make decisions gives us more time to weigh options, formulate and discuss contingencies, and overall have a better opportunity for success. The distance to or from any problem changes the tactics on strategy. It's one thing if a person is walking in an open field 100 yards from anybody with a gun, as opposed to walking downtown 4th Street during a farmer's market with a gun. And cover. A cover is a term used in police tactics to talk about the cover a person has from danger. For example, the difference between being behind an engine block of a vehicle and a mailbox. One will protect you from bullets and the other will not. As I went through the list of equipment owned by our department tonight, I touched on how each one helps with the time, distance, and cover. In conclusion, containing actions, mitigating capabilities, and influencing intentions help move us to our goal of a peaceful resolution. The equipment that we use and have available to us is critical for a peaceful resolution for those involved, our officers, and the community. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Scott. So given Lieutenant Eberle's description of the San Rafael Police Department's equipment in inventory, there are several funding sources that can vary. As you'll see on this slide, the City of San Rafael General Fund, or general budget, capital improvement project, asset forfeiture funding is another funding opportunity, various grants through from local, state, or federal grants are additional sources of funding for this type of equipment. The potential reallocation of city resources, or the transfer of Department of Defense property to law enforcement organizations. This is commonly known as a 1033 program. The San Rafael Police Department does not possess any equipment from the Department of Defense. We don't have any 1033 equipment. So as Lieutenant Eberle shared those categories of equipment that are outlined in Assembly Bill 481, the funding sources for those are largely general fund. Those are just budgeted items. There are two specific items, however, that were obtained through grants. The command trailer was funded through the Department of the Office of Traffic Safety as a command vehicle, and the armored vehicle was funded through a Homeland Security grant. So those are examples of how equipment like this can be funded or procured. So a key element of this legislation is community information and community engagement. So I'd like to just kind of walk through, for those on this call, what the police department has done in terms of pushing the information and engaging with the community for feedback. So as we, in the wake of the January 1st effective date for this new legislation, we've been preparing for the council's consideration, staff report and ordinance and resolution responsive to the new legislation. On March 8th, we shared meeting notice on our police department's website and through all of our social media channels. We included in our information push the full text of the Assembly Bill, the defined list of military equipment that our organization possesses, as well as the draft policy that will be going before the council for consideration. On our website, there is a transparency link that allows full access to all of these materials. On March 9th, information was disseminated to the City Council, giving them information that this item will be coming before them, another requirement of the new legislation. March 22nd, We distributed a reminder information on our social media sites, including our website. And at this point, we reached out to our local media and received some information and interest from both the Independent Journal as well as the local Patch. Stories have run notifying and informing the community on this activity, on this new legislation, and our intention to bring this to the council. On April 8th, on or about April 8th, we will be publicizing details of the public hearing that will be going before the council. This tentatively is scheduled for April 18th. Unless something changes on that meeting date, we will notify in the local paper the council meeting date and the item as a public hearing. And then the public hearing itself on April 18th will be a presentation to the city council as a public hearing for their consideration to consider adopting an ordinance and adopting the draft police department policy. Again, all of which are available on our city's website on the police page. So how does Assembly Bill 481 affect San Rafael? So if the city council approves the draft policy and adopts the ordinance that will be before them, the police department will continue to have access to each of the resources that Lieutenant Eberly has shared, both the less lethal resources, the armored rescue vehicle, the other items that were shared. Staff will be required to implement a tracking system for this equipment in our annual reporting, which will occur on or about every May of the calendar year. If the council chooses not to adopt the ordinance and approve the policy, they may send it back to staff for further consideration, additional work. But if it's not approved, the department will cease to be able to use the equipment currently in our inventory, and we will de-inventory the items listed on or by April 30th. If it's not approved by the council, the department will be required to redesign our policies, our procedures, and our response to critical incidents, including our ability to provide and receive mutual aid here in the community. And it's our collective opinion that without approval, public safety would potentially be negatively impacted given the description of the limited military equipment that we have in our inventory. So with that, we are, Lieutenant Eberly and I are prepared to answer any questions, to field any comments, to address any concerns that the community may have. So I'll ask Madam Clerk if there are any comments in the chat.
Thank you. We did receive one comment. This is from Paula. I support San Rafael Police Department and its purchase of whatever equipment they may need to keep our community safe. Thank you for your service. As of right now, that's the only chat that I've received.
Okay, maybe any public comment? Is there anybody in the meeting that would like to make comment or questions?
Yeah, at this time, if you're interested in providing any verbal comments or ask any questions verbally, you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom. And then I'll ask you to unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to provide any comments or questions. I don't see any hands raised right now, but I'll give everyone a few seconds. I do see a chat that's come in. Thank you so much. I'm curious what the armored vehicle has been used for, or how you expect to use it. Thank you.
So that's a great question. We appreciate it. So the armored vehicle, kind of under the umbrella or the theme that Lieutenant Eberly shared, it's better to have it and not need it than to not have it when you need it. Lieutenant Eberly shared a scenario where the use of the armored vehicle allowed us to get closer to an individual who appeared to be in a mental health crisis, and we were able to engage a licensed clinician and member of our crisis negotiations team. The armored vehicle allows us to get closer to an individual who may pose risk to officers or the community. From a potential use perspective, you could think of the unimaginable, mass shooting, a critical incident where first responder personnel need to evacuate or remove an injured person from an event that is yet to be stabilized in the event of shots fired or an active threat incident. So this vehicle that is in our inventory is actually a shared asset with the city of Novato. So it is a regional asset that both the city of Novato and the city of San Rafael use, and is readily available to other law enforcement partners throughout the region.
Thanks, Chief. Once again, for anyone, you're welcome to go ahead and submit a question or any of your comments. And I don't see any other ones, but I just want to make sure I give everyone a little while just to be able to type anything in.
Great, thank you, Lindsay.
I'm not seeing any chats. Oh, we've got one from Talia. Thanks for the thorough presentation.
Great, thank you.
Talia.
Okay, if there aren't any other chats that are pending or popping in, I want to just offer our sincere thanks to those who have participated and chosen to take some time tonight and come and hear our presentation on this matter. We will collectively gather and summarize some of the community feedback for the council's consideration in the public hearing on the 18th. And on behalf of the police department, myself, Lieutenant Everly, and of course the city attorney's office, we're grateful for those who are engaged and chose to come to participate in tonight's meeting. And we thank you very much.